Hi, welcome to another edition of Handlaid Tracks and 3D printed trains with Socrates. Today we're going to take a look at building a straight track N scale using a 3D printed jig. I've been working on building my own jigs because I was working with a CNC machine, but it's taking longer to get it together, so I figured why not just print one with my 3D printer. And I was worried about the heat from the soldering gun iron, so I left a little notch to allow a aluminum heat sink using the jig from Fast Tracks as a heat sink to sit in here. The problem was it ends up being a very time consuming process because you have to move the jig many times. And you can see in the video that this whole process took a lot longer than I was hoping it would, and I had to readjust the jig many times to make it work. In the end, I ended up with a really nice piece of track, but it was a lot more work than I wanted it to be. And the way I look at things is you find a way to do something and then you make it simpler and easier to do it again and again in the future. So I'm trying to develop this print a little bit better as I go on with it. But as you can see, overall it did work for the most part, and the results are quite good. So this is the process of me building a piece of straight track using my own homemade 3D printed track jig. I was using the, again, also Fast Tracks track gauge. It has 3 feet, 2 on one rail and 1 on the other, and it has holds the rails at the proper distance from each other. You can see I kind of got it partially done. Basically put 3 rails under one, or 3 ties on the one rail, and then I could put 3 more ties on the other rail. But the way this initially was set up, there was no way to actually tie the 2 sets of rails together. But the bigger problem was the fact that the 3 or 4 ties are very tight. As you can see, they're hard to get out because I wanted them to stay perfectly aligned. The problem with that is that you cannot reverse the soldered piece easily. I mean, you can kind of force it in there, but you can't get it to fit in there easily. So I had to reprint again with a notch one more time, but this case I had one side that was tight, and as you can see, this one is a bit of the rounded edges on there, so the soldered pieces slip in there easy, and you can go ahead and put in either on the tight side a new piece, or on the other side, the round side, a soldered piece. So I'm going back and forth between them, in some cases using the tight side to put the first tie onto the rail, and then I was using a little system with this little clamp I have that I came up with. I like that little clamp, and sliding underneath it, holding everything in position, using the track gauge to make sure everything is the right distance. And you can see that Weller soldering iron is fantastic. It just, you touch it and it's almost instantaneously. You can see, I mean, this is done extra fast, of course, but still, compared to the other video that I have with the other soldering iron, you can just, it's incomparable how much better this is. And now back to the other jig with the circles on the ends, the looser jig, so I can finish up the last pieces of it. So again, the process worked. It wasn't as easy as I'd hoped it to have been, and that's why I decided that, well, one, that Weller worked so much better than I expected it to, that I decided I could go ahead and use a one-piece jig and just simply solder into it the whole way through. And that was the next step, is to go ahead and build this as a one-piece jig. And for that I decided that it would be half tight and half loose. That way I could do the whole tight side at once, and that'll hold the ties in the proper orientation, and then I can do the whole loose side as well, and that way I can get the ties back out. At the moment I'm printing it a next version of that, which is a double loose, because at some point I'm going to have to combine 2 sets of tracks, and they're both going to be fully soldered, so I want to be able to easily put it in and out without causing any damage to the track. And to do the connection, for the most part, leaving 2 ties open and then overlapping the rails from one side to the other, so and then they meet in the middle of a tie. So this is also designed so that the end of the rail, if you put it on the end, it should line it up just perfectly. I'm still working on getting that right, but it's pretty close at this point. So it took a little while to do the whole thing, especially with this system, but eventually I got through it all the way. And the product was good. and that was the most important thing, is producing a straight track that was straight and that the rails were in gauge. And by using that little gauge and being very, insistent about it, because there's occasionally it'll be a little bound up in some places, and you have to go back on it and loosen that with the soldering iron. And in one case, I actually had to push the rail just a tiny bit to get it to line back into where it should have been. And at that point, you end up with a nice piece of track. But again, it's just a long process to get this far. I'm finally done with it. You can see it moves quite nice, but again, much harder than it really should have been. So as you can see, the process worked pretty well, but as I said, it was a little bit more fiddly than I liked it to be. I was quite happy with the results of it, but I decided I could probably improve it from there. That was the first time I ever used that new soldering iron, a Weller, and it worked so much better than the one I had before that I was thinking, well, I can probably get away with using a one-piece jig and just doing the whole thing at once. And so that's coming up in the next video, because I went ahead and printed a one-piece jig and tried to do it that way. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please subscribe. See you again soon.